Okay, so here I am again. This video is about what a perfect continuity is and what that implies and why I think that space itself is a perfect continuity. Also, this video is a further elaboration on my video about the basic building block of reality, and this is also going to be a response to Steen Peterson, who commented, why not just assume that the universe is an infinite empty space with something in it? So here we go. If space is infinite, it would be infinitely small and infinitely big. Now I want to focus specifically on the aspect of space being infinitely small. If space is infinitely small, then the distance between two infinitely small points would always be infinite. Just imagine being space itself. Imagine being infinitely small. Imagine being infinitely small and you want to travel to another location. Well, that other location would always be infinitely far away. Even if that other location is only 1 inch away from you. If you are infinitely small, it would take you an infinite amount of time to overcome that infinitely small size. In fact, it doesn't matter how close that other location would be to you. Even if that location is located 1 nanometer away from you, if you are infinitely small, it would still take an infinite amount of time to overcome that distance. You would still be infinitely far away from that 1 nanometer. So if you're infinitely small, everything else would always be infinitely far away from you. It would become impossible to travel to another location. Every other location in space would always be infinitely far away, because if you are infinitely small, you would always be infinitely much smaller than the distance you are traveling. So even if you travel an insanely small distance, you would always be infinitely much smaller than that distance, if you're actually infinitely small. So again, it would become impossible to travel to another location. In fact, you would remain perfectly stationary. You wouldn't be traveling at all, because no matter what, you would always be infinitely far away from everything else. I guess this has a lot to do with the paradox of Zeno, where Achilles would have to overcome an infinite amount of infinitely small distances to surpass the tortoise. But of course, Achilles himself is a big object which can easily travel a certain distance. But my point is that if you actually were infinitely small, then you would always have to travel an infinite amount of distance. No matter where you want to go, it would take an infinite amount of time to travel 0.000000008 meters, for example, because you're always infinitely much smaller than whatever distance. So this being said, this is an introduction into understanding space itself. If space is considered to be totally empty, and if space itself is not made out of anything, then space itself doesn't have a certain minimum size. It would have to be infinitely small. Well, maybe it's wrong to put it in that way. Maybe space itself is not a thing, so space itself is not infinitely small, but it would contain infinitely small things. It could contain infinitely small things. Let's put it that way. Yeah, I don't know. Somehow I feel like space has to be a thing in itself. The universe is considered to be filled with space, and space is considered to be expanding all the time faster than light at the edges of the universe. But anyway, so if space itself is limitless, it could contain infinitely small things. So space itself must always be more fundamental than the stuff it contains. Space would always have to be able to contain even more smaller stuff than whatever small things it already contains. Otherwise, the stuff couldn't exist. Because again, theoretically, space could contain infinitely small stuff. So I don't know. But if there is such a thing as space itself, and if you try to imagine how it would be to be space itself, then you would have to imagine yourself as being infinitely small and also infinitely big. Now, here is what I think. I think that space itself is a perfect continuity. But only if space itself is absolutely empty, and if space itself is not a physical thing in the sense that it could not possibly be made out of energy quanta. Just true emptiness, whatever that is. If the universe is filled with infinitely much empty space, then space itself is a continuity. Let's imagine for a moment that the universe is filled with an infinite amount of matter. Matter is made out of particles, and in between these particles there is empty space. Now, if the universe is infinitely filled with matter, then all the particles would be so close to each other, there would be no more space. All the particles would start to merge into each other, turning into one continuous field of pure particleness. You get it? There would be no more individual particles separated by space. They would all be so close together, they would merge together and they won't be separated anymore by space. So they would form a perfect continuity. This is what space itself is, according to me. Space is a perfect continuous empty field if the universe is filled with infinitely much empty space. Now, in my other video, I have made the claim that a perfect continuity is non-local. That basically means that wherever you place a point in the continuity, it would always be the exact same point. If you place point A and B at two different locations in the continuity, there literally would be no difference between point A and B. Like, literally so. There would not even be a difference between their locations. Both of them would be in the exact same location. They would be inside of each other as one point, as though they are not separated from each other. So there would be no distance between anything. Everything would be inside of each other like a singularity. Strangely enough, there would be no difference between an infinitely small singularity in which the universe is stored and an infinitely big field which is perfectly continuous. So in this sense, there is no difference between infinitely small and infinitely big. It's literally the exact same thing. Now, I haven't yet fully explained why I think a continuity is non-local. A continuity is non-local because within a continuity, everything is so perfectly connected with each other that it becomes just one thing. Every separate thing becomes so connected with one another that it merges into one singular thing, including distance. What is distance? Distance means that point A and B are separated by space. But space itself is not separated by anything. So for space itself, distance doesn't exist. Space itself can never be separated by itself. You cannot move two chunks of empty space away from each other such that there would be a certain amount of distance in between them. There can only be distance for the stuff that you put inside of empty space, but there can't be distance for space itself. Space itself doesn't have to travel to another location because it's already there. Space is already everywhere instantly. A particle has to travel billions of light years to get to the edge of the observable universe, but space itself doesn't have to travel. It's already there right now. And the point is that there is no difference between the empty space right here and the empty space on the edge of the observable universe. It's the exact same empty space. Space is omnipresent. It doesn't have a particular location. It's everywhere at the same time. So it's non-local. Okay, so if you take a cubic centimeter of space right here and you take a cubic centimeter of space in another galaxy, those two cubic centimeters of space are the exact same things. The space itself inside these 2 cubic centimeters are not separated from each other. It's one continuous field that is manifesting in these 2 cubic centimeters at the same time. In quantum language, this is referred to as superposition. Space is in superposition. It manifests itself all over the place simultaneously. And that's how a continuity works. And that's also how a singularity would work. Inside a singularity, matter is so densely compressed that it would become a continuity. All the atoms wouldn't be separated anymore by space. They would all be forced together to form a continuity. So anyway, I believe that the foundation of reality has to be a perfect, non-local, omnipresent, continuous field. It has to be perfectly empty, perfectly nothing. And out of this continuous field comes the stuff that does have a certain location in space and time. So you could describe it as discontinuous. The foundation is continuous, and the reality that we can perceive that is being projected in front of our senses is discontinuous. Now, right now, I'm just struggling with the transition between continuity to discontinuity. I don't know how this discontinuous reality is being projected from the continuous field. But that's going to be material for another video. I'm done for now. But it takes me forever to understand all of this correctly. I hope I will succeed one day. Okay, bye.